Hello, and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Rachel, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Today's webinar will be a pre-recorded session, so we won't have a Q&A section at the end. Our next webinar is on September 26th with Christine Moss-Pack on Family Search Catalog Digging Deeper. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from Clotilde Yap. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Clotilde. Clotilde Yap is the Global Collections Manager at My China Roots. Based in London, UK, Clotilde speaks Chinese, French, and Spanish, and spends her time researching untapped archives of Chinese communities around the world. Now we'll play the message from Clotilde.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to the Brigham Young University's Family History Library series of webinars for having me as a speaker this week. My name is Clotilde. I'm the Global Collections Manager at My China Roots, and today I'll be talking about our new database, My China Roots, that is available at Brigham Young. And I'll be talking about everything you need to know about both Chinese genealogy and how to make use of this database. So here is a rough schedule of what I'll be talking about today. I'll be telling you a little bit about My China Roots. I'll talk about who the database can be used by. I'll show you how to access the database from the library. I'll talk a bit about some typical challenges that people face when doing Chinese genealogy research, and I'll give you a demo of how to search the database. So first things first, a little bit about My China Roots. So we, over the last 12 years or so, have been a bespoke Chinese genealogy company, providing research services to the Chinese diaspora. So we've worked with families all over the world in providing research services, including roots trips, translation services, you name it. But a few years back, we decided to create an online platform that would empower people to do some of this research themselves. So our team is very international, as is our user base. We have users who are really from all over the world. So many of them are going to be in North America, but we also work with a lot of Southeast Asian families, Australian families, and Caribbean Chinese families. So next, just a little bit about the database. So the genealogy platform that is available through Brigham Young, also known as My China Roots Library Edition, consists of a massive database of historical records of the Chinese diaspora. So it includes two main types of records. We have records that are from China, that are in Chinese. These amount to about 200 million names, and these are primarily going to be contained inside mainland Chinese genealogy books. On the other hand, we have another category of records that we have available that consists of overseas Chinese materials. So these might be immigration records or burial lists or community records of Chinese communities outside of China. So most of these are going to be in North America, but we have other collections from other parts as well. So how do you, who can access this resource specifically, and who can make the most of it? The My China Roots database was designed primarily for a family history purpose, so for people who have Chinese heritage. But more specifically, it is for individuals whose ancestors left China between the 1850s and the 1950s. So this coincides more or less with the Gold Rush era and the building of the Transcontinental Railroad to the Communist Revolution in China. And during this time period, most people left China, and they came from two key provinces, these being Guangdong and Fujian province. So we'll have primarily records from this time period and these regions in China, but not only. So we do also have other collections from other parts of China, but this is our focus because the bulk of people who left at this point came from these regions. And our collections, as I mentioned, are strongest at the moment in North America, but we also have a handful of collections that are also from places like Peru and Cuba and Indonesia and Singapore. These are smaller than our North American collections, but we're adding more each week. And our long-term goal is to become the primary resource of historical records of the Chinese diaspora. This also means that even though the platform is currently for English speakers, and is designed really for people who don't read or write Chinese, um, eventually we want to have a Spanish version, a Tagalog version, French version, because you really do have Chinese communities spread out across the world in lots of different areas. Now, in addition to the database being used for potentially family history purposes, it has a lot of other applications. So, for example, anyone who is doing family history, anyone studying family history studies, who wants to learn more about what other research approaches and techniques exist for different cultural and ethnic groups, this database would be of interest to them. But also folks who are studying Chinese or Asian studies will benefit from this resource because of the amount of primary materials that we have available, not just in English, but also in Chinese, as well as people who are studying diaspora or ethnic or Asian American studies. They'll be able to benefit from this resource too. So moving on, how do you access the resource? So you can navigate to the BYU Library databases page, and by searching for My China Roots with spaces between each word, or just looking under the letter M, you'll see our database appearing. The other way you can access it is by visiting mychinarootslibrary.com while on campus. So you should be redirected immediately. If you're accessing this website while on campus from your own computer or laptop, you won't be prompted to log in. And so if you're not affiliated with Brigham Young University, then I've listed a few of the other institutions that currently subscribe to My China Roots Library and that you would be able to access the database from as well. Okay, so that now that we know how to access the database, just one last thing before I move on to research challenges and how to use the database. We do also offer a personal subscription for those who might not be a student or faculty at BYU. So this personal subscription costs $89.99 per year, and it comes with family tree notifications. So how it works is you can build your family tree and get notified of matches between your tree and our database. So this is for people who don't really want to do all of the searching and want the system to do it automatically for them. So yeah, this is all available through our main website, mychinaroots.com. So I thought before I show you a bit of how the database looks and how it works, that I might give you a bit of context on what kinds of people are using the service and what kind of challenges they face. So I've taken two fictional characters, Marion and Jacob, that we would consider a typical user of My China Roots. So Marion is born and raised in San Francisco. Her grandparents came from China and settled in California. She speaks a little bit of Cantonese, doesn't really read Chinese very confidently, but might be able to recognize one or two words. Meanwhile, Jacob is from New York City. His grandparents came from Jamaica, one of which was Chinese, and their family speaks a little bit of Hakka, but he doesn't speak Hakka, Hakka being a dialect of Chinese. He doesn't speak Hakka, doesn't read Chinese. So these are some typical people that we would expect would use My China Roots. Now, if we look at Jacob's brick walls, Jacob, when he was growing up, didn't really know that much about his Chinese identity and was not exposed to it as much. His family don't really know a lot about where his great grandparents, great great grandparents came from in China, and he doesn't read Chinese. So let's see how Jacob would interact with the database with the information that he does have. So let me. So this is the homepage for the My China Roots database. And so let's imagine that Jacob arrives here and he wants to explore what resources are available. So he doesn't really have names at hand that he can search, but what he can do is navigate to our general resources that include, for example, a page on overseas Chinese communities. Now, Jacob knows, of course, that his family migrated to Jamaica. So he's going to go here and type in Jamaica, clicking on the first result, which is the country Jamaica. And here he can read more about the history of Chinese immigration to Jamaica, including different migration waves, a few statistics, the estimated Chinese population in Jamaica, what dialects are spoken. So he might recognize, oh yeah, Hakka, this is the language that my family speaks. He'll click on it to learn more about this dialect, how many speakers there are around the world, what typical surnames are Hakka, and other related content. Now, the other thing that is listed on this page is the various records that are available on the database for Chinese people in Jamaica. So we have quite a variety of different records, which I'll show you in a second. But at the bottom, we also have a list of popular surnames in Jamaica. So Jacob, let's say his grandparents' surname was Chin, Chin. He might navigate down here and think, oh, this is my surname. Let's click on it and see what I can learn about my Chinese surname. Chinese surnames are an important clue in Chinese family history research because Chinese surnames have very long history in China, and they can tell you a lot about your family's migration history as well. And this is why we compiled a database of Chinese surnames just for this purpose. So if I'm Jacob, I arrive here and I can discover and learn that actually the Chin surname is very typical overseas Chinese surname. It is related to a whole variety of different Chinese surnames. And it's popular in not just Jamaica, but lots of other countries. But most importantly, what I can learn from this page is that the surname Chin, as it is spelled in English, could in fact be the transliteration of several different Chinese original surnames. So at this stage, if I'm Jacob, I want to narrow it down and figure out which of these is my actual Chinese surname. So for this, I have a few clues. I know the dialect that my family spoke. So I can see that this one exists as Chin in Hakka. I also know what country my family moved to. So they moved to Jamaica. This particular one is looking promising. And it's possible also that I've been told the meaning of my surname, in which case I can look at the meaning of each of these and see which one corresponds to what my family have told me. And finally, the other way is to simply send this page to a relative that does read Chinese and that knows what spelling is our family spelling. And then I'll be able to identify which is my surname. So let's say that Jacob only uses the clues that he has, so the migration location of Jamaica and the dialect of Hakka. So this narrows it down basically to this second option because the others don't seem to have any other surnames that went to Jamaica. So I'll click on this one, Chin, and here I can read more about the meaning of this particular surname, but also its legendary origins. So this particular surname dates as far back as 2000 BC. And this is typical of a lot of surnames, which are very, very ancient. And it turns out that Qin, this particular Qin, is one of the most typical, most common surnames in China today. It's the equivalent of Smith, if you like. On this page, I can also I can also see how many Qin family tree books exist on the database. So these family tree books are one of the most valuable resources in Chinese genealogy. These are digitized and are fully searchable on the My China Roots platform. I'll give you a tour of those as well later. But the reason they are particularly valuable is because they cover many, many generations. Some of them span hundreds of years, and on average, a single book contains 6,000 names of only one family. So think of it as a massive family tree in book format. And they are the main resource when researching Chinese ancestors in China. At the bottom of this page, I can also see what other records are available for this surname on the database. At the bottom, I can also see where in mainland China, where in Guangdong and Fujian province, the Qins traditionally come from. And right at the bottom, there is an extensive section on how this surname has evolved and how it has been spelled, not just in different dialects, but in the different countries where Qins have ended up. And this is where you truly see the scale of evolution and adaptation of surnames that come with migration. So in places like Hawaii, you have a lot of variations on this name. Same thing in Indonesia. And even within Jamaica, this surname has been adapted in many different ways. So the point of these pages is to educate people on how there is a lot of flexibility around the spellings of names and especially Chinese surnames. So people should not be surprised if they find ancestral records of people in their family where the names are spelled quite differently. This is quite a typical scenario. Now, if I go back briefly to the Jamaica page that I was looking at, in addition to a list of Chinese surnames, we also have a section that shows us where Chinese people in Jamaica traditionally come from. So here it says that there are 9 mapped ancestral locations in China. So I'm going to click on it. It opens a new page that lists the Chinese villages and, well, actually, these are a mix of cities, districts, and villages. So it opens a page on our Chinese village database. And if I click on one of these items, for example, I can read more about Shenzhen City and how it is an ancestral hometown of a lot of different Chinese communities, including communities from that ended up in Jamaica. I can see where it is on the map. I can also see what ancestral records exist from this area. And I also can read a breakdown of locations within the city. So why is this important? Let me just go back to my slides for a second. So why is it important to know where in China people's ancestors came from? So in China, as opposed to other parts of the world, there isn't a very long tradition of keeping things like civil records, let alone church records, because the church simply was not as active there as in other parts of the world, and Christianity was just is a recent import. And so instead of official documents, what you're more likely to find are family records, and these tend to be kept within the ancestral village that people came from. So locating your Chinese ancestral home is the key to finding all kinds of records about your Chinese ancestors. And when we say village, we actually mean the hamlet or the little town that people came from. If you look at the history of Chinese immigration from the 1850s to the 1950s, the majority of people who left came from the countryside, even though they left from a port such as Hong Kong or Macau um, or Canton. Most of them came from the countryside. And this is confusing because when they arrived in a new country, like the United States, and they were asked, where did you come from? They may have responded this question quite literally and answered, oh, well, just now I have arrived from the port of Hong Kong. This is where I left. Um, so this is another challenge, another brick wall that people face, which is they struggle to locate exactly the place that their family is from. So what might you find in an ancestral village? You might find things like an ancestral graveyard. You could also find a temple that commemorates your surname ancestors. So in Jacob's case, for example, if he were to find the village that his Chinese forefathers came from, it's quite likely that there would be a Qin temple, so a temple that honors the Qin ancestors. There might be a Qin graveyard where all of his early Qin ancestors are buried. Of course, there could be Qin relatives in the village that remember things about his great-great-grandparents. And most importantly, there could be a Qin zupu or a Qin family tree book that records all of the generations of the Qins in this village. Um, Now, traditionally, the journey to finding these kinds of records is incredibly labor intensive and requires a lot of time and effort and also knowledge of Chinese. You would need to be able to first figure out where your village is, locate it on a map, which is not super obvious if you don't know Chinese geography and you don't know how name spellings have changed. Um, you would also need to somehow, if you were to find the village, you would need to make contact with the village, either yourself or via a translator. You would need to ask them, oh, hey, do you have a family tree book? Can you help me check if my grandfather's name is in the family tree book? So these are a lot of steps. So what we've tried to do at My China Roots is digitize as many of these books as possible. These efforts are ongoing, but ultimately we've cut out a lot of these labor-intensive research steps by making these books searchable by name. So now all people need is a Chinese ancestor name in order to access our vast database of family tree books. Okay, so moving on to show you more of what the database looks like, I'm just going to move on to another use case, this time looking at Marion. So Marion is in a bit of a different position to Jacob because her ancestors migrated straight to the US from China. She does speak a little bit of Chinese. She understands a little bit about Chinese, and her ancestors arrived in the, let's say, the late 1800s, early 1900s. But her challenge is that as she's doing the research, she's coming across many different records which list what seem to be the name of her ancestor, but she can't be sure. There are a lot of variations in spellings. The other challenge that Marion is facing is her family is not willing to talk about the past. And this is very, very common for a lot of Chinese American families because of the history of Chinese exclusion. So during the Chinese exclusion period, Chinese laborers were not allowed to settle in the US. There were a few exceptions. So people were still allowed in if they were merchants, for example, or students, or if they were related to someone who was a native-born Chinese American citizen. But in general, this continues to make Chinese elders, even if it's been several generations since they've been established in the US, it continues to make them sometimes reluctant to talk about the past, just because they have been discriminated against before, and there's still that latent fear that is passed on from one generation to the next. So let's see how Marion would interact with the database. The difference between her and Jacob also is that she's more aware of her grandparents' information. So she has a name to start with. So let's take a look at let's take a look again at the database. I'm looking now at the homepage of the My China Roots database. So this page, in a similar way to other genealogy platforms, has a basic search interface, which can be expanded if you want to add a lot of different fields aside from a name. We also have still lists of different types of records that you might want to search for. Some of these you may recognize, but we have a lot of specifically Chinese collections that are not to be found on other platforms. And the main way that people search the database that I'll be showing you today is the indexed record search. There are other ways to interact with the database, which I'll show you in a bit. But for Marion, let's say she's researching a grandparent called Feng Li or Li Feng, Li being the surname. So I'm just going to type in the name so that you can see what that would look like if I don't apply any filters. So I'm going to click search. And as you can see, I have over 2,000 results for Li Feng only. Now this is way too much to go through one at a time. So I'm probably going to want to filter them down. But just so you can see, these are the categories that we have available for this particular name. So we have, for example, census records, but I'll get back to these in a second. You might also want to filter by source location. So where are these collections from? By gender, by Chinese surname, if it is known, by date of the record, and by whether or not there is an image available. So let's look first at some of the more traditional records that you might be already familiar with. We have a collection of census records. So these are subsets of the US federal census for all the years that are available. And what we've done is we've extracted only the individuals who were recorded as being either born in China or whose race was recorded as Chinese. And the census is a great first step because it places individuals in one place at a certain time. Now, of course, you'll see right away that just within the census, there are 450 or so results for Feng Li. So Feng Li is a very, very common name. And the census is helpful, especially if it has family information, because it will allow me to distinguish between different Feng Lis. If I look at the spouse information and children listed, for example. You'll also notice that the results shown here include partial matches as well as exact matches, even quite high up in the list of results. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier on when I was talking about surnames, it was quite typical for the same, say, Li Feng, to have his name recorded with a few variations from one record to the next. That's because it depended on the immigration officer or maybe the census enumerator's mood on that day or their native language. At the time that a lot of Chinese people immigrated from China, there wasn't a standardized way to transcribe Chinese names and Chinese place names. So that's why you end up with all kinds of different spellings. So these are some examples of official typical records that you might find. We also have things like passenger lists. These are also super valuable because there was a lot of traveling happening, even by those who were then settled in America. They would probably go back and forth between China and America. it was typical for Chinese men to leave China first and then come back to get their wife. Or perhaps they had a wife back in China and returned to get married, but continued to work in the US. So there were a lot of sort of long distance arrangements. So what to mention on this? You'll see that on any record that we have on the database, the surname is always hyperlinked. And if you click on the surname on the record, say I click on this Li, it will open the Li Chinese last name fact page from our surname database. Again, this is to encourage people to try and learn more about their surname and identify the Chinese surname of their ancestors. And from here, they can really search any type of spelling that they might like. So you can try typing some of the common ones like Wong or Yo or Eng. But back for now to our Li Feng search. So as for these types of records, census records, passenger lists, you'll see that a lot of them come from the usual suspects, like the National Archives of the US, of Canada. But we also partner with smaller community organizations occasionally. So for example, we have a selection of Chinese directories. Here, the results for Feng Li come from various California telephone and business directories. And these are super special because, as you can see, they are bilinguals. They have information in both English and Chinese, which is the main way in which My China Roots is different from other platforms. Is we try to focus on sources that have bilingual information because that is what is most likely to help users unlock potential records in Chinese of their family. So here we've indexed the Chinese name of this Feng Li person. Again, the surname is hyperlinked. You can also see where they are residing in the East Bay, as well as other people listed on this page. Now, aside from small-scale community records that we also have some very special Chinese exclusion collections. So these are mostly consistent of exclusion books. These exclusion books, if I take one to look at as an example, these exclusion books were kept at the main ports of entry in the United States that Chinese people were entering via. So you'd have books that exist for Portland, for Seattle, for San Francisco, for example. And the point of these books was to monitor and check the status of every Chinese person that was trying to get into the country. As I mentioned, Chinese immigration was not allowed except under certain circumstances. So if I take, for example, this record, I can click View an Original Record to look at the source image. So here you have a page. Let's see, where is Feng Li? Here he is, Li Feng, who is listed as a laborer. But on this page, you have other individuals with other statuses, such as merchant. Sometimes you have wife of merchant, son of merchant, or son of native. And it will also say where this person was residing, at what stage they arrived. And on the next page, it will say whether or not they were admitted. So if they were coming in via San Francisco, they probably would have been staying at Angel Island Immigration Center while they were being processed. So this is it's a great resource, especially if you know that your ancestor was traveling back and forth. And on the flip side to these exclusion books, we also have a lot of Chinese exclusion or immigration case files. So let me select some that have images available so you can see. So every time a Chinese person wanted to enter the US, no matter whether or not they were already residing there legally, they still need to submit all kinds of documentation to prove their status and to prove that they had been residing legally in the country. And sometimes these case files could be really, really long. It could be dozens of pages, 50 or so pages long. Let me take one as an example. So here we have a case file for Fong Li residing in, I think that's Pennsylvania, PA. So if I click view in the original record, let's just take a look. So here we have a copy of this statement by a Chinese laborer who's about to depart from the US with the intention of returning. This microfilm is quite blurry, but occasionally you will have photographs or copies of passports within a case file. You will have images with a signature. You will have copies of letters that are sometimes in Chinese. You will have letters to and from lawyers or immigration officers. You even have sometimes, let me see if there is one here. Here we go. Transcripts of interviews between the person that is being, whose status is being checked, or witnesses that are being called upon to testify that this is the person that they claim they are. So here, for example, you have lots of information about this that is provided by this person's business partner, and that confirms various facts about the person. So these case files are really, really rich in information. And of course, they are ultimately quite dark by nature because they were used to police an entire race. But they do provide a lot of genealogical information. And again, in this particular file, there is a page with Li Feng's signature, which we have extracted here, and which allows people to either copy paste or even search for it if they wish to. So the last kind of special type of collection that I want to show you, or special record that we have available, is our tombstone and burial collection. So when it comes to Chinese genealogy, we have a few sources that are really quite unique and unavoidable, really, in this type of, to be able to do this type of research and to be able to progress. So on the one hand, we have the Chinese exclusion files, but Tombstones is the other major resource that will often allow people to identify their ancestral place. So if you look at this tombstone of a Li Feng, for example, he's buried in the Chinese Christian cemetery in Daly City, so South San Francisco. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of information on this English page, in English, sorry. But the Chinese part of the tombstone is actually much longer and it has lots more information. It has his full name in Chinese, which sounds actually nothing like Li Feng. In Mandarin Chinese, it reads Li Yanan. And it also lists his birthplace back in China. So you'll see we've indexed not just the name, but the birthplace in Chinese characters. Again, this is because most people using this resource are not going to be able to read Chinese, so they wouldn't even know what is on the tombstone and that it's valuable. So if you click on the birthplace, we've tried to map it to the closest possible location on our Chinese village database. So here, if someone were to come across this tombstone, they'd immediately be able to see, okay, this is where the person was born in China. And we don't stop there. Wherever there is a Chinese name, so a name spelled in Chinese, we will also automatically run a search for it in our collection of Chinese family tree books. So at the bottom of the page, you'll see there's a section called Find Family Records of Fong Li. And it says View 14 Potential Records. So I'm going to click on this and also grab a swig of water. So here what I'm looking at are actually not indexed name results, but full text results in the database. And this is because these family tree books have yet to be fully indexed by My China Roots. We have many thousands of these, and each book contains so many names that it would take a lot of time to do a full extraction of the names in the trees. So this will be planned in the coming years or so, but for the moment, the books are full text searchable. So these 14 results basically correspond to they each correspond to an instance where this name appears in a family tree book. So each of these 14 results corresponds to a different Li family book. You might be wondering, if Li is just one surname, why are there so many books? Why are there 14 different books? Well, firstly, the Li surname is so ancient and that there are today millions of Lis in China. And over the years, the Lis have spread out and established themselves in many different parts of China. So the Lis of Guangdong are going to have in the south, are going to have a different migration path and history to the Lis in the north. And all it took sometimes was for a certain branch of the family to move to a neighboring village, and they basically became a clan in their own right. And so wherever these communities establish themselves, they may have created their own family tree book that commemorates their individual histories. So this is why we have 14 books. These come from different parts of China. Now, I know from the tombstone that the Li Feng I was looking at is from a place in Guangdong. So I'm just going to filter by Guangdong province. And I can see that I have 5 results. I'm just going to click on the first one. This is a book for the Li family in Taishan, which happens to be a key area that a lot of Chinese Americans come from. So I'm going to click Examine Matches. And this opens the page and pages where the name appears. So I'm just going to reorient this page up here. As you can see, this is quite a modern publication. You can kind of tell by the font, it doesn't look very ancient, but it essentially looks like a family tree. You can see the lineage lines and how you might be able to trace them back. So in yellow is highlighted the name of Li Feng as it appeared on the tombstone. And because most people who are using this service don't actually read Chinese, we have this built-in dictionary that allows people to hover over characters and then they get the definition. So I could, at this stage, click on all the different pages and compare the names that appear. At this stage, I would probably want to check whether the names of this Li Feng person's parents and children also match the people in my family tree. If they are a match, then what I would then want to do is trace back one generation at a time and just see how far back this line goes within the book. This particular book is over 8,000 pages long. So it's really a massive family tree, which is why these books are so powerful, because you can get so many generations in one go directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because these books are created and updated by the family and by clan associations who want to commemorate the surname and the clan. Now, the great thing about these books, if I just show you the other kinds of contents that you might find inside them, is that they don't only contain family trees, and this is where they might be of interest to people who are studying Chinese culture in general and Chinese language and local history, is that these books can also come with a lot of local context and history about the area. So why did this particular group choose this particular region in South China to settle in? What were some of the natural resources available? And the books might contain biographies of famous ancestors, but also instructions on how to perform certain burial rites, for example, or other ancestral worship celebrations that take place throughout the year. So they're really fascinating resources in their own right. So just coming back to the search, and I'll soon conclude my presentation. We've looked at different ways to search for people in the database. You might also wish to simply search for a keyword. So this keyword might be a Chinese name that you happen to have, but it could also be any other keyword if you're tracing, for example, migration patterns, or you're researching remittance networks between overseas Chinese and their compatriots back in China. And finally, you might also want to look at just what kind of sources and collections are available. Say you're trying to research the early university students of Chinese heritage in America. So you might be interested in knowing what sort of resources are available on My China Roots about students who are studying abroad. So, well, not abroad, in the US. So here you can see that we have a vast selection of directories by the Chinese Student Association of the US. And for each of these, I can click on the record. I can take a closer look at its contents, or I can simply search for someone inside this collection. And I may be interested in learning what kind of subjects they're studying, where, which universities they're studying at, and other kinds of factual information. So that's it for our very whirlwind tour of the My China Roots database. I look forward to hearing what questions you have about family history research or the tools available.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which is on September 26th with Christine Moss Pack on Family Search Catalog Digging Deeper. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow our Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.